Day 6 of the November-December 95 retreat in Springwater. It's amazing weather, isn't it? Some people told me they thought they'd wake up snowed in. And instead it's melting, warming, sunning and darkening, almost simultaneously. It's just like us, isn't it? And just as there is no entity like weather, I mean, what is it? We speak about the weather changing, but what has changed? Is air currents and temperatures. Where is the weather in that? And in sitting and walking, living through a few days of quiet, with all the turmoil and some peaceful times, sometimes even a moment where everything is okay, it's all right, the way it is. And then some dark clouds, some worries, anxieties, insecurity. Where is the I in all of that? Someone asked me a few days ago whether I believed in reincarnation. I don't. Not that I'm identified with my disbelief, but it just does not interest me. There was a time when it did interest me. Years ago, found some comfort and fascination in this belief. Because in Buddhism it wasn't called reincarnation, but rebirth. Because what after all reincarnates? When the Buddha said there is no self, there is no entity, no permanency. So what is it that reincarnates? But then what is it as reborn? Same question. But having found some comfort in that belief was also some realization it was based on trying to get away from the discomforting thoughts of one's own ending. And who wants to end? There are a few people who do, but most of us don't, because we live in our story. Who wants a good novel to end? Who wants a good movie to end? That's why we have Batman 2. What was that called? My son has a poster of it in his office. Exterminator. Wasn't there such a thing? Was there? Terminator. slept in his office. That's where they had a spare bed, and on his file cabinet was this Terminator staring at us. I don't know whether it was Terminator 1 or 2. And if there is no sequel, we can now go and rent the video. See it over and over. What gives us some comfort, some hope, or some identity. Because we love to identify with the characters of our movies, our favorite movies, just as we identify with the main character of this movie, which is ourselves. Sometimes people say, why am I so attached to myself? Well, why is one so attached to characters and novels and movies and videos? It happens this way. We have words for it like identification, attachment, but the process itself is very much alive to be watched in oneself. Hanging on, grasping onto something in the mind and body, which has nothing to do with this moment of a creaking woodwork. So, we love the story of our life. Regardless of whether it's a happy story or an unhappy story, we're attached to it. We like to tell it, to repeat it to ourselves in fantasy, and it compounds, it adds to itself as we go. It happens automatically. New chapters added, new pictures, new forecasts and hopes, and one of them may be reincarnation or rebirth. To make sure it doesn't end. Because that thought of ending, of discontinuing, causes discomfort, fright, uneasiness. One is out of sorts. As people talking about fear of death, usually mentioned as the first item, the most important aspect of that fear being afraid of a painful death. Obviously, no one wants to die a painful death. And yet, many of us are doing it all the time, and human beings have been doing it, dying painfully. Hundreds of thousands of millions of billions of years. And many have been dying or are dying peacefully, which, as I see it, is only possible when there is no further clinging to anything. Finally letting it all go and be. Which, this finally letting go of everything that there has been clinging and attachment to, is the same thing as being here. It's the same thing. There's no possibility of being here when there is clinging to story of how will I continue, how will I be the next moment. This moment has already become abstracted into an idea of what I like, and will that continue? Or the threatening thought, it may not continue, which is separation, apartness from the aliveness of now, the only place where there is aliveness. There can only be aliveness in dying, to the story, the ideas and clingings. That's simple, isn't it? It makes sense, even to the intellect. So in this being here now, alive, letting go of the story, the attachment to what just seemed so important a moment ago, that's what I'm interested in. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're working with. Sharing with each other, questioning together. And in that there is no place for worrying or yearning for rebirth, which then can see clearly as the arising of a new image content. What I will be or might be or would love to be in my next life. It's thought, isn't it? It's thinking, it's imagination. Do we see that right now? Can't think of rebirth without thinking about rebirth. It's not an obvious, evident fact at this moment of breathing and wind howling. But one can pose the question differently, freshly, if you will. Is it possible to witness the rebirth of self while alive? Is that possible? To witness the rebirth of myself alive right now? And one may find in listening to the rattle in the window and the howling of the wind, the cooling of the skin, pulling up of a sweater, all the sensations that go with it. Caw, caw, caw. And the kicking in of the fan. Everything comes to our aid. One looks for where is the rebirth of the self. Right now, it's not taking place. There's only what's going on. And it is vividly here, present, alive, because there's no self-concern at this moment about my safety, my future, my husband, my grandchildren, children, future of the center. Even though these words are being said, they do not kick in and re-energize the network of self, of myself, with its anxieties and fears and hopes and pleasures and the story weaving all the way through it. That's in abeyance right now. But however long it may be in abeyance, each one of us, comes a moment when that self is reborn, when there's anger or upset, in the narrowness in the confinement of thinking and worrying and angering or pleasing thoughts about myself. This is how we live. reborn from moment to moment, are we? In a new image, a new hope, an old anger. Reborn, you may say, out of nothing, out of empty space of being, which once it is truly, and the words fail, once it is truly experienced without the experiencer, known without the knower, seen without the seer, it's just here, then matters of self become much clearer. What their nature is, where they come from, what their effects are on ourselves and our relationship with each other. This tremendous desire to defend this structure, to make it lovable, to have it confirmed by others. To keep and cherish it. But in that space, there is the absence of space, of empty space, full of creative energy, but no goal to attain. So, if one happens to be interested or passionately interested in rebirth, why not watch it now? And one may find that at that moment of birthing, there's no attention, because that's the very nature of entanglement, that there's absence of attention. But not totally necessarily so. And we've talked about it for 6 days. It is possible at times of stable awareness, sometimes when one is sitting together and sharing and looking at something together with a great deal of attention. And it may be possible to see the about to be born of another idea of myself, to be projected, nurtured, defended. And seeing it, it may not come to that. It may be a still birth. Seeing the reaction so clearly, so dispassionately, and intelligently, that the touch with the real is not lost. The feet are on the ground. Fan is kicking in. So, are we afraid of not continuing? And then let's ask ourselves whether it is other than the fear of the story coming to an end, with all of its pleasures and pains and perfumes. It's said in a very dispassionate way, not in a blaming way or judgmental way. It's an inquiry. Because one can see while yet alive, that in the story coming to an end, nothing ends except clouds parting and disappearing for a while. The empty sky is there. So is the rattle and the breath and the wind. Not as entities. The words seems to make it too discrete. It isn't discrete. In asking what is it, one doesn't come up with an answer except that there is something permeated by empty space, which is oneself and all that it contains. Somebody asked this question a few days ago. What is this joy? I don't know whether I can reproduce it. What is this joy on seeing a crow make a somersault? Or seeing the earth, seeing people? What is this joy? When it feels as though the heart is flowing over, if one wants to be poetic about it. I can't say what it is, but maybe one has had a touch of it, a glimpse of it, or some moments or time spans of it, in which there is no being held back by thoughts about myself, or worries of time, past, present, and future. It's the absence of that, as though a knot had burst in the heart. When the arms stretch out, they embrace everything and everyone. With which we're coming to our second question. Someone posted a note to me. In your talk today, could you speak about doing this work after retreat? What can I say? It's difficult right now in this spacious room, clouds darkening, to think about what will be when the retreat is over, when one gets back home, to the family, to the spouse or companion, or one's own apartment or flat, to work, encountering each other. How will it be? Are you interested? Is one interested? How will it be? The first person I meet, of course, it'll be right after retreat, and there'll be a lot of hugging and laughing and talking. Good feelings, usually. Sometimes for some people, a little too much of it. The nerves are very sensitive, sensitized during 7 days of no talking, or hardly any. I wasn't thinking so much, or trying to think so much of after retreat, which is usually without problem, except maybe for the intensity. For some people, others love it. But how will I meet my colleagues in the office, my supervisor, my wife, my children, my husband. And allow that question to be alive. Not just sort of, it's this typical day 6 retreat question that comes up and has been coming up for as long as retreats have existed. Then it doesn't grab, but is one really concerned? How will we meet each other? And the concern not being so much, how will you meet me to help me, but what will be happening here? Just concerned with my desire to keep this retreat atmosphere going, the quietness, whatever one has cherished or experienced. Or will there be a newly awakened interest in the so-called other? How is it for him? How is it for her this morning, this Monday morning? Monday mornings are usually hard times for people. I read that most heart attacks occur on Monday morning, around 9 o'clock in the morning. The weekend is over, the drudgery is starting again for most people, many people. And do we meet each other with this drudgery? And will there be some awareness which includes thoughtfulness of how it is for the other person? Not just for me. It's sort of an interesting back and forth, if you will. Wondering how is it for the other person, but when the other person comes in grumpy, half depressed, not very friendly, can there be a question, how is it for me right now? And watch the reactiveness with a new transparency. The old reaction comes easy. The habits are deeply ingrained. Not to want the other person to be like that. And anger over somebody else's anger. It's so deep. But it is not invisible when one is interested in finding out the depth of relationship. How is it for the other, and how about my reactions? Can they come to light? Can it all be more visible and therefore not so dark and compulsive and fraught with consequences? I know, it's an interesting question, a worthwhile one. How far will it go? We'll have to see. There's no need to speculate about it, because then we're lost in mental work and removed from what's going on right now. The preferences, the desires, the fears, or some space in all of that. So talking about working with each other, because this is brought up a lot, the difficulty of at work with uncongenial or ego-tripping supervisors, principals, whatever their title may be. How do I work? Am I constantly supervised? It came up in talking with someone who has a very heavy work situation. But as it turned out upon questioning it, one isn't constantly supervised. Even the most ardent supervisor can't be there all the time. So there is space to do one's own thing. And how do we do it? Are we there? One moment at a time. And that is not different from being in retreat, or being at home, or at the office, or in a sick bed. One moment at a time. Can we live that way? And notice in that wondering question how the mind is usually occupied with the coming moments of too much work. How will I get it all done? They're really piling it on me. And the chafing comes more from these thoughts than from just being with the first job, one moment at a time. And that one moment at a time may open the mind to feeling how tensely the hand grabs the pen or taps out the computer. What are you calling those things? The keyboard, the keys. How tense the body is. It can come into awareness. And the realization doesn't have to be that tense. The pen, the computer, the knife, the hammer work beautifully with less effort, which is there habitually but not attentively. So can we at times, wherever we are, and at the office, at home, driving the car, how does the steering wheel feel in the hands? Windshield wipers clearing the window. Can one see it? I don't mean philosophize about it. It's dangerous while driving. There are so many moments in a day of retreating with that moment, with some new attention and new discovery of what reveals itself very willingly when we don't slur over to the future in our minds. And to catch that slurring into the future as it happens and question it, whether it has to happen. Where am I now? And the shock of realization, how far away one was just in that brain operating with fantasies. Does that make some sense about carrying on this work in our daily life? It won't be as easy as here to really watch the eating, because usually while we eat we carry on conversations or we read the paper. But maybe for a moment it dawns, my breakfast got away from me, like that man who came here from Germany. His most precious moment of the week was gone. And at that moment, to feel the spoon, to taste the food, to sense the swallowing and the filling of the stomach, the tightening of the belt. And maybe to eat well, but not too much. It's up to each one. I've never been a preacher on diet or on anything for that matter. I've just found it helpful myself to not eat too much, because one pays too much for it later in discomfort, dullness. And can one take a walk every day, get into the fresh air? Is there any fresh air where one lives? Maybe not. New York City, is there fresh air? But there are parks. The trees have lost their leaves, so there's not much air clearing by trees. And yet, to get a bit away from the cars, remember when I was staying at Alliance, when we still had an office in Rochester? One time I had a blood test taken at the hospital, and I walked back to Alliance from Alexander on Monroe. And it seemed intolerable, the exhaust from the cars. It was at morning rush hour. And then just making that left turn into Alliance, where there were some lawns and some trees, made all the difference in the world. Could notice it. There was easier breathing. So there is some real meaning in finding a place where there are some natural things growing, not just virtual reality. Although that's what we seem to crave. It's amazing. I just read in Newsweek about the new movie, something about toys, and that's just the beginning of now that's the future of movies, to have this virtual computer reality, the fascination with it. Personally, those movies make me sick. But what is so for one isn't so for another. Interested to hear what people find in those things. If you live close by, you can drop in Springwater and take a walk. There's not going to be hunting season forever. And do some exercises. I sound as though I was moralizing. I'm not. People ask me what to do after retreat. To come up with something new. Many people tell me I do exercises tomorrow. Again, it's one of those ideas which one pushes out of the way. So sometimes it's helpful to have some kind of a daily schedule for it. I personally have one myself. Before I get up in the morning, I have a reasonably firm mattress, do 10 or 15 minutes of exercises, on and a little bit on the floor. For a while it was a chore to remember it, and it's amazing to watch the brain come up with reasons why I don't need to do it today. I'll do it another time. Maybe later in the day, but this later in the day never happened. So now, it really feels good. The body is sort of toned up a bit. If before walking around doing things or sitting for hours, it has gone through some stretches. It's really a wonderful thing. And it's a wonderful thing when one doesn't think about what one is going to do afterwards, but really be with this moving, stretching, bending body. I sound like a yoga advocate. But it is a wonderful thing to let attention trickle through the body by feeling what's going on. Not thinking what should go on. I ought to reach that far or hold that long. Then it's mind stuff again. To let it be real while the wind is howling. And will one find some quiet time during the day? First thing in the morning? Or at night before going to bed? One person told me the only time I can do it is at lunchtime in my office when everyone else is out to lunch. Doesn't matter where and when and how long. But does one see not just the need, but also the beauty of finding and living some quiet time with oneself, whatever that is. And if the mind is full of thoughts, full of worries, full of emotions, listen to the hum, to the buzz of the body-mind with some space, which is not used to condemn or rationalize. Just listen to the waves of. It's really energy circulating, exploding, blocking, tensing, wanting relief. And how quietly can one listen to all of that going on in a half hour, 20 minutes of stillness? By quietly, I don't mean that what comes into vision or into hearing necessarily ends. It may. That's wonderful when it does. But if it doesn't, there can still be stillness surrounding it. The stillness of no fault finding, no wishing it were otherwise, which feels as though oneself was getting smaller and smaller and smaller and tinier, down to one pinpoint of awareness. In which the wind howls and the eaves shake and shatter. The breath flows. For what purpose, I know not. The mind wants to create purposes. But life just is. One moment at a time. We will end here for today.